When a reclusive billionaire CEO leaves his office safe wide open, it's not carelessness. It's a deliberate test for a struggling single father recently hired at the company. As the days unfold, hidden truths about loyalty, morality, and the real meaning of integrity surface, shaking everyone around them. In a story set in the heart of New York City, every decision carries weight, and one man's choices will define not only his future, but the trust of a powerful man who hides a painful past. The morning air in Manhattan was brisk, the kind that carried the scent of roasted coffee from the corner carts and the faint hum of traffic rolling along Fifth Avenue. Michael Carter adjusted, his worn-out coat, its buttons barely hanging on, as he stood outside the glass tower of Hawthorne & Co., one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. It was a building that screamed money, polished marble floors, gold-plated nameplates, and security guards who looked more like Secret Service agents than DOORMEN. Inside, the reception area was a world apart from Michael's cramped apartment. In Queens, the light from massive chandeliers bounced off pristine walls, and the air smelled faintly of fresh lily. Michael kept his hands in his pockets, partly to hide their trembling and partly to keep from fidgeting. He had been called in for a position he barely believed he could get: personal assistant to the CEO himself, Richard Hawthorne. For a single father juggling part-time jobs just to keep the lights on, it felt like stepping into another universe. When the elevator doors opened to the top floor, Michael was greeted by a tall man in his late 60s, silver hair perfectly combed, eyes sharp but unreadable. "Mr. Carter," Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and curiosity. They shook hands firmly. "I've read your application. You're not the typical candidate I hire." Michael swallowed, unsure whether it was an insult or an observation. "But I believe in testing people differently," the CEO added, leading him into an office so vast it felt like its own penthouse dot as they sat across from each other. Richard leaned back in his leather chair and studied him. "I'll be honest," he said. "This job isn't about experience. It's about trust. If you pass my test, you'll earn more than just a paycheck." Michael frowned slightly. "What kind of test?" The CEO didn't answer. Instead, he simply stood, walked to the corner of the office, and spun the dial of a massive steel safe until the heavy door swung open, revealing stacks of cash and neatly bound files. Without a word, Richard left the door wide open and smiled faintly. "Welcome to Hawthorne & Co., Mr. Carter." Michael's eyes lingered on the safe longer than he meant to. Bundles of $100 bills sat in neat stacks beside folders marked "Confidential" in bold red letters. He shifted in his seat, unsure if this was some kind of trap or just an eccentric display of wealth. The hum of the city outside was muffled here, the silence making the open door feel louder than any alarm. Richard returned to his desk, his expression unreadable. "You'll start today," he said casually, as though the open vault behind him didn't exist. "Your duties are simple: manage my schedule, handle correspondence, and make sure nothing falls through the cracks." Michael nodded slowly, still unsure where to look. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Michael answered emails, scheduled meetings, and fetched coffee. But every time he passed Richard's office, the safe loomed in his peripheral vision untouched. His conscience whispered reminders of his bank account balance and his overdue rent. When the workday ended, Richard dismissed him with a nod. "Good work today." Michael left the office with a knot in his stomach, wondering if he had just been handed an unspoken challenge, one that could make or break his future. By the second day, the open safe wasn't just Michael's secret to wrestle with. The staff had noticed too. He overheard two assistants whispering near the break room. "It's been open all week," one said. "You think someone's going to try?" The other shrugged. "I heard he's done this before. Last time, the guy didn't last long." Michael forced himself to focus on work. Every document he handled, every phone call he took, he felt eyes on him. It wasn't paranoia. Richard had a way of appearing suddenly, leaning in the doorway. As if gauging his reactions. Around midday, Richard called Michael into his office. "I'm heading to a meeting across town," he said, grabbing his coat. The safe was still open, its contents undisturbed. "Keep an eye on things." Michael nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Hours later, as the sun dipped low over the skyline, Michael locked up for the night. He glanced one last time at the untouched safe and wondered if he'd passed another stage of an invisible exam. Michael's apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily, his 8-year-old daughter, was at the table coloring. "How was work, Dad?" she asked. Michael smiled, hiding his unease. "Good. Busy." But as he washed dishes, his mind replayed the image of the open safe over and over. The third morning at Hawthorne & Co., Richard wasn't in yet. Michael walked past the office and felt the magnetic pull of that open door. He could almost feel the crisp paper of the bills, smell the ink. His rent, Emily's school supplies, groceries, it could all be covered in one handful. He sat at his desk, gripping the arms of his chair, reminding himself why he took the job: to provide stability, not shortcuts. But the voice in his head was relentless. No one would know. By the end of the day, Michael's self-control felt frayed. He wasn't sure if he was being tested or tortured. On the fourth day, Richard invited Michael to lunch at a quiet steakhouse 2 blocks from the office. The atmosphere was dim, lined with dark wood panels and the smell of sizzling meat. Richard ordered for both of them without asking. Between bites, Richard asked about Michael's life, where he grew up, how he ended up raising Emily alone. Michael hesitated but spoke honestly, telling him about his late wife and the years of scraping. "Bye." Richard listened intently, occasionally swirling the wine in his glass. When the plates were cleared, Richard leaned back. "Integrity is a rare currency, Michael. Most people think it's about not breaking the law. It's more than that. It's what you do when no one is watching." Michael felt the words land heavily. Was this his answer about the safe? As they walked back to the office, Michael realized Richard had never once mentioned the open vault, but the message was clear enough. That afternoon, Michael found a sealed envelope on his desk with his name neatly written in bold pen strokes. Inside was a list of tasks for the day, but at the bottom, one line stood out: "Please organize the contents of the safe." His heart raced as he stepped into Richard's office. The bills were stacked perfectly, but touching them felt dangerous, almost forbidden. He counted each pile, logged each folder, and returned them exactly as he found them. The weight of the cash in his hands was almost hypnotic. Halfway through, he heard footsteps and froze, but it was only the janitor passing by. Still, the moment left him rattled. When he handed Richard the inventory sheet later, the CEO's expression was unreadable. "Efficient work," he said simply, as though the entire exercise hadn't been a silent interrogation of Michael's morals. By the end of the week, whispers about the safe test had spread through the company like wildfire. Some employees smirked knowingly when Michael passed. Others avoided eye contact altogether. It was clear everyone had their own theories. During a coffee break, one colleague leaned over and said quietly, "If I were you, I'd take something. He's so rich, he wouldn't even notice." Michael forced a polite laugh, but felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just a test from Richard. It was a test from everyone around him. That evening, as Michael left the office, he spotted Richard standing in the lobby, speaking to a man in an expensive suit. Their eyes met briefly, and Richard gave the smallest of nods before returning to his conversation. The gesture was subtle, but it left Michael with the sense that every move he made was still under the microscope. On Monday morning, Michael arrived early to find Richard already at his desk, the safe still wide open. "You left a file on the copier last Friday," Richard said without looking up. "Be careful. Information is more valuable than money." Michael apologized, retrieving the file quickly. The reprimand stung more than he expected, especially since he'd worked so hard to be careful. Later that day, while scheduling a meeting, Michael accidentally forwarded an internal memo to the wrong department. It was harmless, but his stomach twisted with worry. Were these slip-ups enough to fail him? That night, he lay awake, wondering if the open safe wasn't just about resisting temptation. Maybe it was about handling pressure, mistakes, and scrutiny without crumbling. The next morning, Richard called Michael into his office. "You've been doing well," he began. "But don't confuse silence for ignorance." His eyes were sharp, his tone calm but edged. Michael nodded, unsure whether it was praise or a threat. Richard stood and walked to the window, gazing at the skyline. People reveal themselves over time. Most can't resist showing their true nature. He turned back, almost smiling. "Let's see if you can." Michael left the office with a heavy feeling in his chest. It wasn't the money that scared him anymore. It was the idea that he might disappoint the one person giving him a real chance. In the hallway, a few employees glanced at him curiously, as if sensing something was shifting. Michael kept walking, determined not to give them a reason to doubt him. That evening, Michael picked Emily up from school. She held his hand tightly as they walked home, chatting about her day. "Dad," she said suddenly, "if you found a lot of money, like a lot, would you take it?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "We could fix the apartment, maybe get a puppy." Michael smiled softly, but felt a lump in his throat. "Money's not worth it if it costs you who you are." Emily nodded as if she understood, though Michael knew her world was still small and simple. But the conversation lingered in his mind long after she fell asleep. Lying in bed, he realized the test at work wasn't just about passing for Richard. It was about proving to himself and to Emily the kind of man he wanted to be. It was nearly midnight when Michael's phone rang. The caller ID flashed Hawthorne and Co. His heart jumped. "Carter," Richard's voice said calmly. "I need you in the office, now." Michael dressed quickly, kissed Emily's forehead, and slipped into the cold Manhattan night. When he arrived, the office was dim except for the light spilling from Richard's open door. The safe was still wide open, but this time papers were scattered across the desk. "An urgent contract needs sorting before morning," Richard said, handing him a file. Michael worked silently, focused on every detail. Richard stood by the window, watching the city below, saying nothing. The silence was heavy, but not hostile. The last page was signed and sealed. Richard simply nodded. "Go home, Mr. Carter. You've done well tonight." It wasn't much, but it felt like the closest thing to praise Michael had received. By the next morning, the office was buzzing. Why was Carter here so late? A junior associate whispered as he passed. Maybe he was counting the money. Another replied with a smirk. Michael ignored them, but the gossip burned in his ears. During lunch, his friend Clara from accounting pulled him aside. "People are watching you, Michael. They want you to fail. Be careful." Her tone was sincere, but her eyes hinted at concern. Back at his desk, he spotted Richard speaking quietly to the head of security. They both glanced in Michael's direction before continuing their conversation. That night, Michael realized this wasn't just a test from Richard. It was a war of perception, and every rumor could be a weapon against him. 2 weeks into the job, the temptation was no longer constant, until it returned with force. A late afternoon meeting ended with Richard leaving early for a dinner engagement. Once again leaving the safe wide open, the office was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Michael walked past the open vault, glancing at the neat stacks of cash. His mind flickered to Emily's worn sneakers, the overdue utility bill on his kitchen counter. His hand brushed the doorframe, lingering for just a second. Then he exhaled sharply and walked away, back to his desk, refusing to take even a single bill. But deep down, he wondered how many more times he could walk away before something or someone pushed him too far. On Thursday, Richard invited Michael to accompany him to a high-profile client dinner. The restaurant was one of those places without prices on the menu, where the waiters seemed to glide. Instead of walked out, Richard introduced him as my right hand, which caught Michael off guard. Throughout the evening, he watched how Richard navigated conversations, charming, strategic, always in control. At one point, a client joked, "With a safe like yours, I'd never sleep." Richard smiled faintly. The safe's not the risk, the people are. Michael felt the weight of the words land directly on him. On the ride back, neither man mentioned the comment, but Michael knew it hadn't been random. The next morning, Michael arrived to find a folder missing from the safe. Panic surged through him. He checked every drawer, every file cabinet. Nothing. When Richard arrived, he noticed immediately. "Something's wrong," he said quietly. They reviewed security footage, but no one had entered the office overnight. Richard's gaze lingered on Michael. Sometimes things disappear without leaving a trace. That's when trust matters most. Michael's stomach tightened. He knew he hadn't taken it, but proving that was another matter entirely. The silent suspicion was worse than an outright accusation. By the end of the day, the folder mysteriously reappeared in the safe, exactly where it had been before. Neither man mentioned it, but the tension between them thickened. That weekend, Emily's school had a field trip to the Natural History Museum. Michael took the day off to join her, watching her eyes light up at the towering dinosaur skeletons. During lunch, Emily asked, "Do you like your new job?" Michael hesitated. "It's challenging, but I think it's worth it." She smiled. "As long as you're happy." Her words stayed with him. He realized that his decisions at work weren't just about him. They were shaping the kind of example he set for her. That night, back in Queens, he felt a renewed determination. If this was a test of character, he would pass it, no matter how long it took. Monday morning began with an unexpected twist. A full security audit. Uniformed officers moved through the office, scanning badges and checking files. Michael was called into a conference room, where a security officer asked pointed questions about his access to the safe. He answered honestly, explaining every instance. He'd been inside. Richard sat quietly in the corner during the questioning, arms crossed, saying nothing. His presence was both reassuring and unnerving. When the audit ended, Michael was cleared. But the unspoken message was clear. The scrutiny wasn't over. It was only intensifying. That afternoon, Clara stopped by Michael's desk. "You're doing fine," she whispered. "But don't trust anyone too easily. Around here, loyalty is a currency, and people trade it fast." Michael appreciated her words, but he also noticed how she glanced toward Richard's office before speaking. It made him wonder if she knew more than she let on. Later, while delivering documents to the CEO, Michael caught sight of Richard on the phone. "Yes, he's holding up so far," Richard said, not realizing Michael could hear. The comment replayed in his head all evening. So far, the two words that told him the real test hadn't even begun. The next morning, Richard didn't show up. An email from his secretary said he was away on business indefinitely. For 3 days, Michael managed his duties without him, but the safe remained open, just as before. It was strange. Without Richard watching, the temptation somehow felt heavier, as though the lack of supervision was the real trial. On the 4th day, he found a note on his desk in Richard's handwriting. "Trust is proven in silence. Michael." stared at the words, realizing that even from a distance, Richard was still watching him. Late Friday afternoon, a man in an expensive navy suit arrived at the office, asking for Michael by name. He introduced himself as Daniel Hawthorne, Richard's son. Daniel studied Michael for a moment before speaking. "My father thinks highly of you. That's rare." Michael wasn't sure how to respond. They spoke briefly about the company, but Daniel's questions felt probing, almost like an extension of the test. "My father believes people show their true selves when given opportunity," Daniel said, glancing toward the open safe dot as he left. Michael realized the test might not just belong to Richard anymore. It could be a family affair. When Michael arrived Monday morning, Richard's office was completely empty. The desk was bare, the chairs neatly arranged, and the safe, for the first time, stood closed. The absence of its gaping mouth made the room feel smaller, colder. He stood in the doorway, unsure if he should enter. Clara passed by and paused. "Looks strange, doesn't it?" Like the heart of the place stopped beating. Michael nodded silently. The open safe had been unsettling, but at least it had been a constant. Now he felt like the rules had changed without warning. Later that day, HR informed him that Richard would be away for an extended period and that Michael would temporarily manage certain executive responsibilities. The news stunned him. The role came with more authority and far more eyes watching his every move. As he left that night, Michael glanced once more at the sealed safe. He didn't know why, but its silence felt heavier than when it had been. Open. The next week was relentless. Michael's inbox overflowed with urgent messages. Investors demanded updates, and employees sought his approval on decisions that once would have gone directly to Richard. Every choice he made seemed to carry extra weight, and he could feel the pressure building. During a tense budget meeting, Daniel appeared again, this time sitting quietly in the corner, observing. He didn't speak until the end, when he said, "You're making calls my father would approve of. Keep it that way." His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of an unspoken warning. At lunch, Clara pulled him aside again. "They're watching how you handle power, not just temptation. This is bigger than the safe now." Michael knew she was right. The test had evolved. That night, Michael found himself thinking not about what was in the safe, but about whether he could carry the trust Richard seemed to be placing in him, without being crushed under it. One rainy evening, as Michael prepared to leave, a man from the acquisitions department stopped him in the hallway. "Listen," he said quietly, glancing around. "You've got access now. Certain files. If they found their way to the right hands, we could both benefit." Michael froze. It wasn't money being offered outright, but information, and in their world, information was worth more than gold. The man's smile was thin, knowing. "Think about it," he added before walking away. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The offer wasn't tempting in the way the cash had been. It was worse. There would be no visible theft, no clear crime, just a quiet exchange. That could change everything. By morning, he decided he wouldn't touch it. Not because it was risky, but because it would mean crossing a line that, once stepped over, could never be UNCROSSED. Daniel requested a private meeting. His office was as sharp and minimal as his suit, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. "You've turned down some opportunities," Daniel began, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Why?" Michael met his gaze. "Because they weren't right." It was the simplest way to put it, but the truth ran deeper. Because every decision reflected on Emily, on the kind of father he wanted her to know. Daniel leaned back. "You're either incredibly honest or incredibly strategic. My father likes both." He gave a faint smile before dismissing him. As Michael walked back to his desk, he felt a strange mix of relief and tension. He'd passed another stage, but he still didn't know where the finish line was, or if there even was one. 2 weeks later, without warning, Richard returned. He walked into the office early, greeting no one, and went straight into his office. The safe door swung open within minutes, its gleaming stacks of cash once again on display. Michael entered to deliver a morning briefing. Richard listened quietly, his eyes steady. When Michael finished, Richard asked one question. "Did you touch it?" Michael shook his head. "No, sir." Richard's expression softened, just slightly. "Good. Most don't last this long." The words carried both approval and an unspoken history of others who had failed. For the rest of the day, Richard acted as if nothing had changed, but Michael could feel that something had. That evening, Richard asked Michael to join him for a drink at a quiet bar. Over a glass of bourbon, Richard finally spoke openly. 20 years ago, I hired a man I thought I could trust. I left the safe open for him, just like you. He took everything and cost me far more than money." Michael listened in silence as Richard described how the betrayal had nearly destroyed the company and his personal life. "Since then, I've tested everyone who works closely with me. Most fail within days." Richard's eyes met his. "You didn't. That matters." The weight of the words settled over Michael. This wasn't just about money. It was about the ghosts Richard carried. When they left the bar, Michael realized this was the first time Richard had shared something personal. The next morning, Michael arrived to find not just cash in the safe, but a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond bracelet, glittering in the office light. No note, no explanation. He knew immediately this was deliberate. It wasn't about bills anymore. It was about something traceable, something personal. Taking it would be impossible to hide. The bracelet stayed in the safe all week, untouched. Each time Michael saw it, he reminded himself, "This is not mine." The temptation wasn't in the object. It was in the thought of what it could buy. Friday, the bracelet was gone, and Richard never mentioned it. But Michael knew the silence meant he had passed another layer of the test. One afternoon, the acquisitions man who had made the earlier offer confronted Michael in the parking garage. "You think you're better than us?" he snapped. "You'll regret this." Michael stood his ground, his voice steady. "I'm not here to be better than anyone. I'm here to do my job." The man muttered a curse and walked away, his footsteps echoing angrily against the concrete. That evening, Richard called Michael into his office. "I heard about the garage," he said simply. Michael was startled. Word traveled fast here. Richard smiled faintly. "Standing your ground when no one's watching. That's the rarest thing of all." The following Monday, Richard handed Michael a sealed envelope. Inside was a new contract, double his salary, expanded responsibilities, and the title of Executive Operations Director. "This is yours if you want it," Richard said. "No more tests. You've proven more than enough." Michael felt a rush of relief and pride. He thought of Emily, of the nights he'd gone to bed wondering if he could last one more day. "I'll take it," he said firmly. Richard extended his hand. "Welcome, partner." Months later, Michael stood in the same office where it had all begun. The safe, now his responsibility, was closed, but he knew that one day he might leave it open for someone else. Emily visited the office after school, marveling at the view from the top floor. "It's beautiful up here," she said. Michael smiled. "It is. But it's not the view that matters. It's how you get here." As they left, Michael glanced at the safe, thinking of all the choices that had brought him to this point. He had faced temptation, suspicion, and pressure, and had walked out stronger. And somewhere deep down, he knew Richard had been right. Integrity was the rarest currency of all. Michael had never expected Richard to become more than just a demanding boss. But as weeks passed, their conversations grew longer and less formal. One afternoon, after a stressful board meeting, Richard invited Michael into his office. "Success isn't just about money or power," Richard said, looking out the window. "It's about knowing when to fight and when to step back." Michael listened, realizing the CEO was offering guidance few had received. That day, Richard shared stories from his youth, battles lost and won, lessons learned the hard way. For the first time, Michael saw the man behind the empire, someone shaped by pain and perseverance. Their relationship shifted subtly from employer-employee to something deeper, a fragile but genuine mentorship forged in trust. Michael noticed subtle changes in Richard's demeanor. Late nights at the office became more frequent, and his usual sharp gaze sometimes softened into shadows of sadness. One evening, as rain pounded the city streets, Richard confided a painful secret, the reason behind his obsession with trust. A betrayal that cost him a close friendship and nearly his sanity. Michael felt the weight of those words. It was clear this test with the safe was never just about money. It was Richard's way of protecting himself from being hurt again. Their bond deepened, tied not just to business, but to shared scars and the fragile hope for healing. Despite their growing trust, office politics grew ruthless. Rumors about Michael's rapid rise stirred envy, and subtle sabotage attempts tested his patience. A key report went missing right before an investor presentation, forcing Michael to scramble and improvise. Whispers floated in the hallways, questioning his competence. Clara warned him, "You're stepping on toes. Be ready for the backlash." Michael steeled himself, knowing this was just another test, not from Richard, but from those who feared. Change. Every challenge hardened his resolve to prove he belonged. One afternoon, Michael received an unexpected call from a woman claiming to be his estranged aunt. She revealed truths about his late wife's family, secrets that explained years of distance and pain. The news shook Michael. He had long carried guilt for not bridging the gap, and now old wounds reopened. But instead of pulling back, he chose to confront the past. Emily sensed the tension, but remained a source of light, reminding him of why he fought so hard. Family, after all, was what gave his life meaning. Richard invited Michael to a charity gala, a glittering event filled with the city's elite. It was both a test and a celebration, an opportunity to showcase Michael's growth. As they mingled, Michael observed the subtle dance of influence and power. He navigated conversations deftly, surprising even himself. Near midnight, Richard pulled him aside. "You've come far," he said quietly. "But the real test is ahead." Michael's heart raced. He didn't yet know what awaited, but he was ready. Back at the office the next day, Michael found an anonymous letter slipped under his door. It warned him to back off certain projects or face consequences. Fear crept in, but so did determination. He refused to be intimidated. The note was a reminder. Trust might be rare, but betrayal was common. Richard offered quiet support, reinforcing the importance of standing firm. Together, they began to unravel. Who was behind the threats? Michael was offered a lucrative position at a rival firm. The salary was tempting, and it promised less scrutiny. He wrestled with the decision, torn between security and loyalty. Emily's future weighed heavily on his mind. After long nights of reflection, Michael declined the offer. He realized some battles were worth fighting, especially when trust was on the line. An internal investigation revealed a mole within the company, someone feeding confidential information to competitors. Michael's quick thinking helped identify the culprit, earning him respect and solidifying his position. But the betrayal cut deep, reminding everyone that trust was fragile and hard. One. Richard surprised Michael with an unexpected proposal to become a partner in the company. With Shares and decision-making power. It was an honor and a burden. Michael understood the weight of responsibility this entailed. He accepted, not just for himself, but for Emily, and for the chance to reshape the company's future. With his new role, Michael set out to implement changes, fostering transparency, fairness, and respect. Employees noticed the shift, and slowly, the toxic rumors faded. Michael's journey, once marked by tests and temptations, now became a story of hope and renewal. Managing a growing family and a demanding career tested Michael daily. Late nights at the office competed with bedtime stories and school events. He learned to delegate, trusting his team while staying present for Emily. The struggle was real, but every smile from his daughter reminded him why it was worth it. Richard, now more open and less guarded, sought Michael's advice on personal and professional matters. Their roles shifted, becoming partners in more than just business. Together, they envisioned a future built on shared values and mutual respect. A sudden market crash threatened the company's stability. Michael coordinated emergency meetings, made tough calls, and kept morale high. The crisis tested every lesson he'd learned, and he emerged stronger. Michael began thinking about legacy, not wealth, but impact. He started mentoring young employees, sharing his story and values. Emily, proud of her father, dreamed of making a difference too. Years later, Michael stood before the office safe, now his to guard. He opened it, leaving the door ajar, a symbol of trust for the next person ready to face the test. As he walked away, he knew some lessons never ended, but that was the beauty of life. Michael's phone buzzed late one night. An urgent email from a subsidiary hinted at financial irregularities. His pulse quickened. After months of steady growth, this was unexpected. The next morning, he dove into the numbers, piecing together the puzzle. Each irregularity hinted at deeper problems, mismanagement, maybe even fraud. His team worked overtime, the weight of responsibility heavy on everyone's shoulders. Michael felt the familiar pressure of leadership, the need to protect not only profits, but the people who depended on the company. He knew the coming days would test everything he'd learned. Amid the chaos, a quiet determination settled within him. This was another kind of test, one he was ready to face head-on. As the investigation unfolded, Michael found help where he least expected it. Clara, once a cautious observer, stepped forward with crucial evidence. Her courage surprised him. She shared documents that uncovered a complex web of deceit woven by a trusted executive. Together, they crafted a plan to confront the betrayal, balancing discretion and action to protect the company's future. In that moment, Michael understood that trust could be rebuilt, even from the darkest places. News of the financial scandal leaked to the media. Headlines questioned the company's integrity, shaking investor confidence. Michael faced the press with a steady voice, owning the mistakes and promising transparency. It was a harsh spotlight, but he refused to back down. Inside the office, morale wavered. Employees feared layoffs and instability. Michael made it his mission to keep the team united, reminding them of their shared purpose. The battle wasn't just financial. It was about preserving hope in a time of doubt. At home, Emily noticed the stress etched on Michael's face. One evening, she placed a small drawing on his desk. A simple heart with the words, "Stay strong." The gesture reminded him why he fought so hard. No matter how fierce the storm, his family was his anchor. Balancing crisis and parenthood was exhausting, but Michael found strength in those quiet moments of connection. Emily's innocent faith fueled his resilience, inspiring him to lead with both heart and mind. Months of hard work began to pay off. New audits confirmed the worst offenders had been removed, and financial health was slowly restored. Investor confidence rebounded, and internal culture shifted toward openness and accountability. Michael's leadership was credited for steering the company through its darkest hour. Yet, he remained humble, knowing the journey of rebuilding trust was ongoing. One afternoon, Richard surprised Michael with a letter, an invitation to join the company's board of directors. It was a milestone few ever reached, symbolizing full acceptance and partnership. Michael reflected on the long road from tentative assistant to trusted leader. The test that began with an open safe had transformed into a legacy of integrity. He accepted the position, ready to shape the company's future at the highest level. With his new role, Michael championed initiatives that prioritized ethics, diversity, and employee well-being. He mentored young professionals, sharing lessons learned from both success and failure. Emily proudly told her friends, her dad was a leader who cared, a far cry from the insecure man who once walked into a glass tower hoping for a chance. Michael felt a quiet satisfaction knowing his impact would endure beyond balance sheets and quarterly reports. Years later, Clara returned from a sabbatical, bringing fresh ideas and renewed energy. Michael welcomed her back as a partner in progress, knowing their shared history forged a strong foundation. Together, they tackled new challenges, technological innovation, global expansion, always grounded in the values that had carried them through. Their friendship deepened, a testament to trust rebuilt and maintained. A tempting offer from a multinational corporation tested Michael's loyalty once more. Though the salary and prestige were attractive, he hesitated. The company he'd helped rebuild was more than a job. It was a mission. After careful thought, he declined, choosing to continue building something meaningful rather than chasing fleeting rewards. It was a decision rooted not in ambition, but in conviction. Emily graduated from high school with honors, her proud smile lighting up the auditorium. Michael watched from the crowd, grateful for every sacrifice that had brought them here. Balancing career and family remained a constant struggle. But moments like this made it all worthwhile. He promised himself to always be present, knowing some victories were measured not in dollars, but in memories. Richard, now semi-retired, entrusted Michael with overseeing a new generation of leaders. Mentorship evolved into partnership, with Michael carrying forward Richard's hard-won wisdom. Together, they crafted programs to nurture integrity and resilience in young professionals. Michael saw in these efforts the seeds of a legacy that would outlast them both. Technology and market shifts brought new uncertainties. Michael spearheaded efforts to adapt and innovate, guiding the company through digital transformation. He encouraged open dialogue, empowering employees to embrace change rather than fear it. The future was unknown, but Michael faced it with steady confidence built on years of trials and triumphs. In a quiet evening at home, Michael reviewed old files and letters from his early days at Hawthorne, and the memories stirred a mix of pride and humility. He'd come far, but the lessons of trust and integrity remained ever relevant. He thought of Emily, now preparing for college, and hoped she carried those same values forward. Michael understood that the true measure of success was not in what he had gained, but in what he had preserved. At a company ceremony, Michael introduced a promising young assistant, the newest candidate for the open safe test. He saw in her the same nervous determination he once had. As he left the room, he paused to glance at the safe, now closed but always ready. Trust was cyclical, and Michael knew the test would continue long after he was gone. In his final speech as CEO, Michael spoke of integrity, resilience, and the power of second chances. He thanked the employees, the mentors, and his family who stood by him through every trial. The story that began with an open safe had become a testament to human strength and hope. As he closed his remarks, Michael smiled, knowing he had not only passed the test, he had rewritten its meaning for generations to come.